Brittany, are we ready to get started? I'll go ahead if you're ready.
Yes, let's go ahead and get started.
All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's discussion on the high price of undervalued homes, which will help you to understand and address appraisal bias. We're delighted to also welcome our distinguished panelists today. First, I need to cover some housekeeping items, as we always do. We ask that you remain on mute throughout the program. This is very important as we're all in the same Zoom room together and we will be able to hear you throughout. We are live streaming to Facebook and this session is being recorded, so please be aware of that as you're on camera. And it's your choice whether to stay on camera or off if you're not speaking, but just please remain on mute throughout the program when you're not speaking. If you do have questions or comments, feel free to use the chat or the raise your hand feature. And I know that we are going to have an excellent session. So first, I'd like to introduce our Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission Executive Director, Chad Dion Lassiter. Chad is a national expert on race relations and the founder of Black Men at Penn School of Social Work, Inc. at the University of Pennsylvania. Most recently, Executive Director Lassiter was honored as a recipient of the Pennsylvania Social Worker of the Year Award, given by the National Association of Social Workers Pennsylvania chapter. Edie Lassiter, would you please start us off with some opening comments?
Yes, thanks first and foremost, Laura, for the introduction. I want to welcome everyone to what we call at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, the beloved community. I also want to acknowledge that this is in fact Fair Housing Month. So happy Fair Housing Month to everyone. I want to also take this time to thank the organizers of this, our illustrious Director of Fair Housing Commercial Property, Adrian Garcia, who is with us today. He lost his voice this morning, but he organized this along with Brittany and with our Director of Communications. I want to also take this time to acknowledge our three speakers who are powerhouses in this space. They are social justice warriors, they are social change agents, and I would invite all of us to just sit back, enjoy this, but also have a pen and paper, because the three presentations are going to take us to not just an intellectual school, but a school of action as it relates to the subject matter. Lastly, I want to just talk about Black homeowners and how they face discrimination and appraisals. A lot of this is not perceived, a lot of this is not imagined, it's factual, and the qualitative and quantitative data speaks to this. So once again, just want to thank the organizers for this and end by saying happy Fair Housing Month to all, and looking forward to listening and learning with my entire spirit, and just want all of us to do the same as we hear from these three brilliant women. Take care. Thank you.
Wonderful. I would also like to welcome everyone. My name is Brittany Mellinger, and I am truly honored to introduce our distinguished panel and to moderate our discussion this afternoon. As Edie Lassiter said, we truly have a trio of fair housing experts joining us today to provide insight into the issue of racial bias in home appraisals. So I'm going to introduce all three of our panelists before jumping into the discussion. And I'd like to remind you that we will have some time for questions from the audience at the end of this panel discussion. So as you're hearing from our panelists, please feel free to put any questions or comments that you have into the chat. Nikitra Bailey is going to be our first panelist today. She is the Senior Vice President of Public Policy at the National Fair Housing Alliance. Ms. Bailey manages the Public Policy Department and is responsible for developing and spearheading a visionary, comprehensive policy strategy to implement NAFA's mission. Ms. Bailey provides thought leadership for the organization, liaises with policymakers and other stakeholders, supports resource development, and works collaboratively with NAFA's departments, membership, and board of directors to provide housing equity. Previously, she served as an executive vice president at the Center for Responsible Lending. She played an integral role in designing and driving CRL's consumer protection and fair lending agenda. She directed mortgage advocacy, supervised resource development, and served as the principal strategist for coalition partnerships that span civil rights, faith, women, labor, and community advocates across the nation. Recently, she led advocacy to secure passage of the Homeowners Assistance Fund in the American Rescue Plan legislation, which provides billions in relief for COVID-19's hardest hit homeowners. She is the author of articles and reports on the impact of predatory lending on people of color and women. Ms. Bailey has provided expert testimony to Congress on housing issues, and she serves on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau Consumer Advisory Board. She also appears frequently in national media. Our second panelist will be Angela McIver. Angela is a national leader and advocate for fair housing for all. Angela joined the Fair Housing Rights Center in southeastern Pennsylvania in 2007 as Chief Executive Officer. In 2016, Angela was appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. In 2018, she was elected to the board of the National Fair Housing Alliance. In 2019, Angela was designated as the National Housing Fellow under Strong Families Commission. Angela delivers housing commentary on the radio show Turning Life Corners on WPPM 106.5 FM, and she has also been featured on multiple radio programs. Angela has 29 years of experience and specializes in serving as a systems analyst by developing customized business solutions, institutional and organizational networking, and community partnerships, coalitions affecting adults and youth, and identifying social intersections and solutions. Currently, Angela is pursuing her licensure as an expert on trauma. Angela produced the two-time award-winning independent film, Life Isn't Fair, and in 2018, she created and released an independent docuseries entitled Memoir of a Home, a short biography featuring residents and a historical account of their address and community. In 2014, she was the recipient of the Willow Grove branch of the NAACP Humanitarian Award for Community Service. She earned a Bachelor of Science in Behavioral Science from Pennsylvania State University. She also earned a Master of Social Services and a Master of Law and Social Policy from Bryn Mawr College. And our final panelist is Melody Taylor. Melody was appointed by HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge, an assistant to the President for Domestic Policy, Susan Rice, to serve as the Executive Director of the Interagency Task Force on Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity. Concurrently, Melody also serves as the Regional Director for the Mid-Atlantic Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. She serves the region in implementing programs and policies in all matters relating to fair housing, economic opportunity, civil rights, and non-discrimination in the implementation of HUD programs. Melody's training, contributions, and commitment to fair housing span a period of 20 years. Melody has an expansive civil rights career working with nonprofit, human rights, state and federal agencies, including her work in program and policy development and strategic planning for private and government entities. All right, welcome to all of our panelists. So we'll get started with Nikitra. I'd like for you to start off our discussion by giving us an idea of the data and the research on this topic. Please tell us about NAFA's report, what oversight of this industry is currently in place, and where are the most serious issues?
It's muted. We can't hear.
My apologies for that. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Great, thank you. My apologies for that. And thank you, Brittany, for your kind introduction. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. As you said, I'm Nikitra Bailey, Senior Vice President of Public Policy at the National Fair Housing Alliance. And I'm going to talk with you today about our groundbreaking report on appraisal issues. But before I do that, I will share with you a bit about who we are at the National Fair Housing Alliance. The National Fair Housing Alliance leads the fair housing movement, and we work to eliminate housing discrimination and ensure equitable housing opportunities for all people through our work. And our report today that I'm going to be delving into is titled Identifying Bias and Barriers, Promoting Equity, and it's an analysis of the appraisal standards and appraiser qualifications criteria. And we were able to work on this report, and we released it back in January 2022 of this year. And we did it along with some of our important partners in the work that we do. And our report was actually commissioned by the appraisal subcommittee, and it is managed by the Council on Licensure, Enforcement, and Regulation. And the goals are to identify instances in which the following facilitate or systematize racial and ethnic bias, the appraisal standards, and the appraisal criteria. And as I shared, we worked on this report with our close partners in this work. So my colleagues at the National Fair Housing Alliance, including our CEO and President, Lisa Rice, and our General Counsel, Morgan Williams, along with our Senior Counsel, Maureen Yap and Scott Chang, all helped to draft this report. And they worked really closely with Peter Christensen, who is a principal in the Christensen law firm, as well as NAFA's long-term counsel, Stephen Dane from the Dane Law Group. And for our methodology, we looked at the Appraisal Foundation's materials. We looked at their standards, the criteria, the training, the bylaws, the reports, laws, regulations, case laws, GSE materials, news articles, and research. We also conducted a number of interviews in preparing our report. We spoke naturally with the Appraisal Foundation, the appraisal industry, the mortgage industry, fair housing advocates, and researchers at various places, including Freddie Mac, as well as our good friend, Dr. Andre Perry, who has really done groundbreaking work looking at the impact of appraisal bias in communities of color, and found in particular in Black communities that homes are devalued at a point of about $156 billion annually. So our report is really groundbreaking, and it shows that appraisal bias is not a one-off. We found that based on our research that there are systemic challenges to the system that must be addressed. And we started looking at the Appraisal Foundation itself. So just a bit of background to really help folk understand the unique nature of appraisal regulation. So in 1989, after this savings and loan crisis, Congress passed the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act, and it incorporated the Appraisal Foundation by reference. The Appraisal Foundation is a private nonprofit entity, and their regulator, the Appraisal Subcommittee, can monitor or review its activities, but it has no actual authority. So from there, the Appraisal Foundation has a board of trustees, which is heavily influenced by industry. According to its bylaws, the majority of the board of the trustees must be active appraisers. Moreover, industry sponsors such as the American Bankers Association pay fees and gain the right to appoint the trustees. And then from there, the board of trustees appoints the members of the Appraisal Standards Board and the Appraiser Qualifications Board, which are almost exclusively active appraisers from industry. These boards then set the minimum standards for conducting appraisals and the minimum criteria for becoming an appraiser, which must be adopted by states. So this background is important because it helps us to see some of the challenges with appraisals across the board. One of those challenges being governance. So the legal authority to promulgate standards and criteria is not clear. Also, the Appraisal Foundation's procedures tend to favor industry access and viewpoints. And then the Appraisal Foundation selection process tends to favor a closed loop system of industry viewpoints. So what we're recommending is that Congress and other stakeholders consider the legal authority. and that the appraisal foundation should state the legal authority, provide the standards for free, and consider the consumer impact. And also, the appraisal foundation should repeal the majority of financial donation requirements and provide equal opportunity for advocates to participate. We also looked at fair housing requirements and training. So the problem here is that the standards contain only vague discussions of discrimination and provide appraisers with broad discretion. The criteria only vaguely speaks to fair housing training, and then the appraisal foundation's fair housing training is often inaccurate. So NAFA's recommendations are that the Appraisal Standards Board should revise the appraisal standards to clearly prohibit discrimination and set clear guidelines for the exercise of discretion. We always remind people that under the Fair Housing Act, appraisal bias is against the law. The Appraiser Qualifications Board should revise the criteria to clearly require housing training. It's really important that we have this fair housing training be a mandatory requirement. And then the Appraisal Foundation should revise and develop the fair housing training. So all of these things need to happen so that fair housing can become a part of this process. As I mentioned briefly earlier, we know the cost of the devaluation of homes. Another important point from our report is barriers to entry. So the appraisal criteria here that's a problem is that it contains many barriers to entry. The appraisal workforce does not reflect the diversity of our nation. We know that, upwards of 95% of the appraisal workforce are white and many of them are male. There is also an appraisal shortage that needs to be addressed. So we're really pushing for steps that would really increase diversity, equity, and inclusion within the field itself. So our recommendations call for the Appraiser Qualifications Board to analyze each barrier for disparate impact, expand outreach, monitor demographics, and prepare new professionals for the technology of the future. And one of the barriers that we lift up in the report is a requirement for appraisers to have a college degree. We believe that this needs to totally be reconsidered, and we need to make sure that it's not prohibiting people that will perform well from the profession from being able to enter into the profession. An additional point from the report is compliance and enforcement. So the problem here is that the GSEs maintain a non-public database of appraisal reports, and that lenders and consumers cannot systemically track complaints against appraisers. And it is difficult for lenders to manage fair housing risk, and it's difficult for consumers to actually challenge problem appraisers. So here we call for stakeholders to work more collaboratively to publicly release the appraisal data, develop a publicly available complaint database and compliance management system, and consider improvements to negligence standards and the reconsideration of value process. It's really important for the reconsideration of value process to be revised to really allow consumers to effectively challenge problematic appraisals and improve standards, fairness, and transparency. I know we've all seen the ongoing news articles around many of the challenges where we see families believing that they had to totally whitewash their homes in order to get a more accurate based appraisal. So with that, I'll stop, and I look forward to offering my suggestions in our ongoing discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that really valuable information. I'd next like to invite Angela McIver to share about your work at the Fair Housing Rights Center. So you work on the ground in Philadelphia and in southeastern Pennsylvania, working with community members around this issue. Can you tell us a little bit about the impact of this type of housing discrimination on individuals and at a community level?
Thank you so much, Brittany. I certainly can, and I want to begin by thanking you for this invitation. It's truly an honor and a pleasure to be with everyone today. Once again, my name is Angela McIver. I serve as the Chief Executive Officer of the Fair Housing Rights Center in Southeastern Pennsylvania. So I've decided to put my response into this context. Aside from closing the wealth gap, we must address the cascading effect of the health and well-being of protected classes who must prepare for, encounter, and deal with appraisal bias. Before going into the goals of this short presentation, I just want you all to know that the mission of the Fair Housing Rights Center is to ensure equal access to housing opportunities for all people. And we do that by way of our services that includes advocacy, complaint intake, investigation and resolution, compliance services for private housing providers and jurisdictions that receive federal funding to affirmatively further fair housing, conferences, symposiums, mass media, education outreach, housing counseling, which is new for the organization, information and referral, and something that I am extremely proud to announce, and that's that we operate as a trauma-informed service provider. That means a lot to us. So here are our goals. We're going to discuss the adverse experiences that it can impact us on a conscious as well as an unconscious basis, discuss how we internalize adverse experiences and consider complaint-related damages, discuss how outward behavior, emotional health, and relational health impacts physical health, discuss the brain neuroscience sequential model by Dr. Bruce D. Perry, brain states trauma, and most importantly, and that's that there is healing and recovery from trauma. I'm not going to go too deep into this slide because I believe that we all understand that in many ways there is a segregation tax that we pay when we live in segregated communities. This information was provided by the Brookings Institution back in 2001, and I'm going to juxtapose it to what the PAVE report released in 2022 about information that it acquired from 2021. But equalizing for income, Black homeowners received 18% less value for their homes than white homeowners. For every dollar of income, whites were able to own $2.64 compared to Black homeowners who had $2.16. And you can see that a lot of this is driven by that redlining map that we've had since the 1930s that continues through its legacy to affect neighborhoods. In addition, this gap in home values or segregation and tax imposed on Black homeowners primarily results from the high degree of racial segregation in neighborhoods. And it seems like racial segregation seems to be one, not the only, but one of the driving forces here. Now, from the PAVE report, and I don't want to say anything that Melody is going to talk about when she presents, but there is one point here that I want to make, and that's that new research from Freddie from 2021, which used census data, finds that 12.5% of appraisals for home purchases in Black and majority Black neighborhoods and 15.4% in majority Latino neighborhoods result in a value below the contract price compared to only 7.4% of appraisals in predominantly white neighborhoods. This research corroborates prior observation that a neighborhood's average appraised property value tends to decrease as the share of historically marginalized population increases. So, you know, again, that red line map and the way that we have been socially engineered into neighborhoods continues to adversely affect us. Now I want to go behind the scene and talk about the dual effect of discrimination that it has on people. And I believe that this effect that we're going to look at right now is something that we can consider when we're working with complainants who file complaints, and we can translate this into actual damages. So one of the most obvious damages that we can look at is that when people recognize that their property value has been misvalued, that's actual dollars and cents. Those are numbers that you can add up. You can say, you know, here's this figure in real time, here's the damage over a period of time. But beyond that, it also affects people because they begin to doubt their own worthiness. People wonder, do I deserve this? What is it about me? And I want to read from the book, Savage Inequities by the author, Jonathan Kozol, just a brief passage. So he interviewed someone who was from Mississippi, and here's what the person had to say. In Mississippi, it was the fight for legal rights. This time, it's a struggle for survival. In certain ways, he says, is harder now because in those days, it was a clear enemy you had to face, a man in a hood, not a statistician. No one could persuade you that you were to blame. Now the choices seem like they are left to you. And if you make the wrong choice, you are made to understand you are the blame. And I posit that that is exactly what could happen to someone who experiences housing discrimination and through the appraisal bias process, that when that valuation comes in low, they may internalize that low number and attach that value to themselves. In addition to that, they may doubt their qualifications, meaning their credit score, debt to income ratio, education, and so many other factors. People may doubt the quality of their property and wonder, well, what didn't I do? Very quick story. Back in November of 2021, I went to work one day, and when I left the office in the evening, I hit the start button on my car and it sounded like an explosion. I didn't know at the time that my catalytic converter had been stolen out of the parking lot. So 2 days later, once the mechanic contacted me to diagnose the car, when I asked, well, what didn't I do? Finally, I was told, Miss, you didn't do anything. Someone stole your catalytic converter. And I'm suggesting that this way I felt when I found out that my catalytic converter was stolen is how people might feel once they realize that it's not them, it's not the quality of their property, it's not even their residential area. It was the bias that occurred during that appraisal experience. And people may not recognize that they have been culturally conditioned. This is a very important point because when cultural conditioning occurs, then it could possibly prevent someone from filing a complaint. Because some of us may be wondering, well, why don't we see more of these complaints if this is such a big deal? Well, I want to go behind the curtain and help us understand that there are many reasons why people never file complaints. Besides the cultural conditioning, it's also the internalized oppression that it can occur. And it's not only internally ways in which people feel oppressed, but there could be limited access to resources. And I want to talk about that a little later around affirmatively furthering fair housing. Next, there's the absence of fair housing education that may be adding to the confusion. There's only so much that a FIP in the Fair Housing Rights Center in Southeastern Pennsylvania operates as one of the FIPs in the Commonwealth, but there's only so much we can do when we're not getting full support from jurisdictions that receive community development block grant funding that can do more to educate the public about all forms of housing discrimination, including appraisal bias. And then people may experience pain that can be physical, emotional, and relational, and can show up in different ways in people. So it could start as physical and some manifest into emotional and certainly bleed into relationships that they have. And some discriminatory experiences contribute to toxic stress, allostatic load, and trauma. Those terms can be interchangeable, but there can also be slight differences. Here we have the Lakeside Global Institute's iceberg analogy. And the important key features about the iceberg is that the top is small compared to what we see on the bottom. The top is that outward behavior, what people display, but the real power is below the surface. And below the surface, we have two components: the emotional health that consists of things like self-esteem, moral character, self-confidence, and self-image. And below that, we see relational health, how someone is able to love, if they can love at all, what they think about fairness. Are they experiencing fairness throughout their life? Trust and trustworthiness and power goes back to that sense of agency. If that is missing, it'll contribute to why you'll see low filings, even though there's perhaps more appraisal bias that's taking place than we realize. So the strength of the layers under the water determines the real strength of the iceberg. It's not only what you see on the surface. So don't be fooled by what people present to you oftentimes. What we're looking at right now is the brain neurosequential model by Dr. D. Perry and Bruce D. Perry. I love Dr. Perry's work. A lot of his work is around children, but I posit that the same things that happen to children can happen to adults. And we're just not getting enough research in this area. And I'm going to talk more about that towards the end of the slides as well. So as you're looking at all this stuff in front of you right now, here's how I'd like for you to take it in. Let's start from the bottom up. Note that there are two sides, the left and the right side. And then you can see that there's something in the middle. So I'm going to make it all make sense right now. At the very bottom, we see the brain stem. And then the brain stem, that's on the right side, pardon me, to the left. On the right, you'll see what the brain stem is in control of. It is in control of blood pressure, heart rate, and body temperature. Very important physical functions that the brain stem is responsible for. But when we experience trauma, trauma impacts the brain stem. Hold on to that. Move upwards to the cerebellum, also known as the diencephalon. To the right of it, what is that in control of? Motor regulation, arousal, appetite, satiety, and sleep. Again, very important bodily functions. And when we have experienced trauma, allostatic load, that toxic stress that I talked about moments ago, what might we see in this area? Depressive and affect symptoms that people will display. Moving upward, the limbic system. What does it control? Affiliation and reward system, attachment, which is so key at the beginning of life, because how we attach at the beginning of life to our caregivers will show up in how we attach to other people throughout our lifetimes. So when people have insecure attachments at the beginning of life, or disrupted attachments, or disorganized attachments, many times without an intervention, we will see that in the relationships that they have in their personal lives. Sexual behavior and emotional reactivity is also what is in control through the limbic system. And what is affected here through trauma, we will see substance abuse like alcoholism and the use of other substances, as well as relational difficulties. And then that very top layer, the cortex, where we have on the other side, what is it in control of? Abstract thought and concrete thought. And when we experience toxic stress, allostatic load, and trauma, shame and guilt. Hold on to that as we move forward. When we're working with people who have been impacted by trauma and the other terms that I've used, we must be aware of the different brain states that they can show up in. For example, during intakes, how a person begins the conversation is an important cue to us about the direction that this conversation is going to go in. Meaning, if someone starts out in that first column, calm, they are probably in their prefrontal cortex using that executive function. They're capable of abstract and concrete thinking, and their sense of time can also project into the future. So you can ask all kinds of questions, and they can probably give you quick responses to those questions. But if someone contacts you and they're more in an alert state, they are now in a deeper part of their cortex, the subcortex, where you can see they lose the ability to do abstract thinking, but it's more concrete thinking. And their sense of time, now it's more limited to weekday thinking. So if you're asking questions about things that happened months ago, they're going to have a harder time giving you answers in that moment. Moving on to the alarm state. When they're in that state of mind, now they're in the limbic system. They're not in the cortex anymore. They're deeper in their mind, deeper in the brain, and they're being more emotional with you. And you can see that time is even shorter for them because now we're dealing with hours and minutes. So if you start asking questions about months ago or so, they're going to struggle to give you a response. Fearful, deeper in the brain. We're talking about midbrain, more reactive, minutes, seconds. And then last but not least, when someone is terrorized, and periodically we come across people who present in that manner, they are in the deep recess of their mind, in the brain stem, they're more reflexive, and their sense of time is lost. So it's going to be important for us as we're entering into those conversations and we're hearing from people to get a sense of where they are when they're talking, because that can drive the type of questions that we'll ask. We may not get a good interview out of them the first, second, or third time, depending on how much harm has occurred. So building a relationship is going to be important in that instance. When trauma occurs, here are some definitions of what it is. And you're looking at an example of neurons to the right side of the screen. And, you know, humans have about 84 billion neurons in the brain. So it's an overriding emotional event involving deep distress, alarm, fear, or terror. It's a neurological electrical jolt that occurs inside of us. It's an event that may be perceived as inescapable. So think about what an interaction might look like inside of someone's home if an appraisal is taking place, or if someone is reading the outcome of the appraisal and they're thinking one thing's going to happen, but something else occurs. And then there is the possibility of that sustained toxic stress allostatic load that I mentioned over and over that we're defining as trauma. And in more details, it's a powerful sensory memories that are created that lead to neurological change in the landscape of things, because what does the body undergo? We've all heard this: fight, flight, freeze. And if you haven't heard submit and capitulation, those are responses that people can elicit as well. A little more about trauma. It's defined as a terrifying event that a person experiences, witnesses, and I stop right there because it's not always the person you think who might be traumatized. It could be someone else who's present, who's experiencing it, like a child, or a spouse, a partner, another relative. The traumatic event also is something in which the grave physical harm occurs because a person feels that they were threatened. A traumatic event causes the person to feel intense fear, terror, a sense of helplessness. Again, that could contribute to why we're not seeing an immense amount of filings. We know that appraisal bias is happening, but if the numbers are not where we think they should be, I hope I'm giving an explanation for what's contributing to that. And then acute traumatic stress is experienced by anyone witnessing a traumatic event or violence. And then trauma impacted person is something of a more neutral term that we can use to describe people who've had in some way been impacted by trauma without calling them victims or survivors, because not everybody accepts that language. Some people, they become offended when you use the word victim, even though they may be a victim. And then there's good news here, and it's really important to leave on a high note because we can heal and recover from toxic stress, allostatic load, and trauma through education and services. And I'm suggesting that there's at least 3 things that need to happen here. Strengthening, affirmatively furthering fair housing activities, that we get more medical research on the relationship between housing discrimination, specifically appraisal bias and other forms of housing discrimination. But since we're talking about appraisals right now, appraisal bias and housing through the medical community, and that we develop our trauma lens and improve our PART. And PART is an acronym for Prevention, Avoid, Respond, Therapeutic Process. So we don't all have to become trauma experts, but we all have to be aware that we're working with people who are likely to have been impacted by trauma. So we never want to create more of that in their lives. For example, earlier when I talked about the different brain states, and if someone is in an excited or alarmed or fearful brain state, and we're trying to get information from them, they may not be able to recall the information in the moment. And unfortunately, it might take an intervention for some people, not all, but for some, before they're able to recall through their senses how to put that story together for you. And what I have considered, I'm not sure if this is a fact, and that's why research is so important. There may be times when the statute of limitations, whether it's the Human Relations Commission statute of limitations, HUDs, or the courts, may not be enough time for a person who's experienced trauma through housing discrimination can recall the events or put the story together for us. So it's something I think that we have to consider and avoid re-traumatizing people, even when we're asking questions. So be careful about our expectations and respond in ways that we're mindful of our tone. And I tend to be demonstrative. My hands are all over the place when I'm giving a presentation or when I'm talking. Well, for some people that might be a problem. So I have to be aware what their facial expression looks like when we're having a conversation. And just because people appear to be okay doesn't mean that they are. So you have to be mindful of my entire appearance. And if we're face to face with people, if we wear fragrances, that could very well trigger somebody. Colors can trigger people. Sounds can trigger people. And then therapeutic responses. So it's us being informed. It's us providing education for someone who may need an intervention, and it's how our systems work. Here I have information about resource materials, books that cover trauma-impacted persons and systems that serve in persons impacted by trauma. And I happen to have the books in front of me, Black Pain, which is something that not only Black men and women should read, but I think all people can benefit from reading this book. One of my faves by Dr. Bruce Perry, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. The title's misleading. You can't put the book down once you pick it up. From Louis Cozolino, we have The Neuroscience of Human Relationships, and then another book of his, The Neuroscience of Psychotherapy, Healing Social Brain, and then Destroying Sanctuary. So, once we destroy it, we're going to have to build it up so we can create sanctuary. And then something that is extremely fascinating to me, and that is about compassionomics, the revolutionary scientific evidence that caring makes a difference. And it's not only in the medical industry, but it's in all of our work. And it's not to say that you all don't care. Of course you do. But this book is chock full of research, hence research again, helping us to understand that the more we study these topics and apply what we learn that's positive, we can help people heal and recover from their experiences. Patients become more compliant, complainants become more compliant. And then last but not least, Getting Past Your Past, which is really a book chock full of ways to help people to understand how they can use self-help techniques in order to help heal themselves. And that concludes my presentation. I'm looking forward to the Q&A section. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Angela, for that perspective on trauma and how that impacts this issue. Next, I'd like to invite Melody Taylor, who, as we heard in her bio, she has provided such key leadership to the PAVE task force. Melody, I'd like to invite you to share about the scope and the work of this task force, as well as the recent report that's been released. So I'm going to pull up your slides so we can go ahead and share those.
Oh, great. I'm glad you were able to snag them. Thank you. And thank you, Angela, for such a deep conversation there. I think I'm going off script here, but as we explore appraisal bias and discrimination in other areas, I implore you to have greater conversations surrounding this relating to damages and remedies. Heard this morning on a radio show, there's going to be some conversations about reparations in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I, think about how pain and trauma is calculated as it relates to discrimination. And that's such a rich dialogue. So thank you for that. So good afternoon again. I'm Melody Taylor. Honored to be here with you today to celebrate Fair Housing Month and to amplify the PAVE Action Plan. Over the past 6 to 8 months, I've had the honor of serving as the executive director of the Interagency Task Force on Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity, which we have affectionately entitled PAVE. And just as I mentioned just a few moments ago about the Tulsa race massacre, on June 1st of 2021, the centennial of the massacre, President Biden announced the creation of this task force to develop a transformative set of actions to root out racial discrimination and ethnic bias in home valuations. The task force, as mentioned at the top of the hour, is chaired by Secretary Marsha Fudge and the Domestic Policy Advisor, Susan Rice. It's almost hard for me to believe that almost a month ago, we watched the Vice President, which was a very proud moment for me, of the United States, Kamala Harris, announce with heartfelt endorsement the release and the adoption of the PAVE Action Plan. This plan represents, when enacted, the most wide-ranging set of equity reforms to home appraisal process since Congress passed landmark financial reform legislation in 1989. And we believe that to be a huge accomplishment in the pursuit of ensuring equity for all. If you could advance the slide, please. So the action plan lays out a series of key themes. And in Nikitra's presentation, the NAFA report, and some of what Angela mentioned with regards to a call to action, the action plan most certainly does that. So the key themes are making the appraisal industry more accountable, empowering consumers with information and assistance, ensuring that technology-based alternatives to human appraisals do not perpetuate bias, and cultivating an appraisal profession that's well-trained and looks like the communities in which we serve, and coordinating enforcement to keep industry accountable. And then lastly, leveraging federal data and expertise to inform policy, practice, and research on appraisal bias. If you could turn to the next slide. And the next, please. So again, the action plan was purposed to create an equitable path forward to addressing the persistent misvaluation and undervaluation of properties experienced by families and communities of color. And what I heard Chad say at the top of the hour also is the perceived or imagined. And throughout the course of this, there has definitely been rhetoric and pushback on whether or not there's been enough data or the type of data that was used to determine whether appraisal bias is real or not. And I'd offer to say to you is that we know that it's real, right? Redlining has happened over the course of time. Insurance redlining and insurance discrimination has happened. Blockbusting in the sales market has happened, and the appraisal industry is yet a subset of that market. So we know that it is real and it has happened, and the PAVE action plan provides that. So how we attacked the documenting the cause, extent, and consequences of appraisal bias, we created several work streams: policy and guidance, education and outreach, data and research, and then an enforcement and compliance. If you go to the next slide. And so how we arrived at the concrete action items that were designed in this report, there were 13 cabinet and independent federal agencies and offices that participated in this task force. which we were given 180 days, a sprint, to be able to produce this report. We created 21 unique agency action items that are identified to combat appraisal bias in the market and in the report. We listened, we learned, and we engaged over 150 external stakeholders, holding listening sessions with advocacy, industry, academia, philanthropy. And in those sessions, we were able to validate the findings that were outlined in the action plan. And then lastly, if you haven't taken a look at it, there are 42 discrete commitments that are identified and pledged for completion by each one of those 13 agency task force members that participated in this endeavor. Next slide, please. So I'd like to share with you some of the early wins. When we envisioned this task force, one of the big things for me was that we created opportunities where policy would meet people. Oftentimes government can create these large policy initiatives that don't necessarily touch the people in which we serve. And it was critically important to me as a leader of this task force to find early wins and opportunities where big policy decisions were not being made that could be swept in a matter of an administration, but that we created sustainable long-term administrative opportunities to be able to create touch points with the community and with consumers and agencies that are doing this work. And so some of the early wins that we were able to capture here, we've heard stories and accounts in the media. One of the victims of this out of California, Marin City, California, the Austins, who a couple sought to refinance their home to do some home repairs. And they received an appraisal that was at $995,000. And California has a high cost of living. They live in a neighborhood that's predominantly white and recognized that their appraisal did not match other comparables and appraisals in their neighborhood. Ms. Austin saw it and wrote a letter and received another appraisal from another appraisal company. And the appraisal came in at $1.4 million. And so they did file a private suit. And the significant point here is that DOJ found it necessary and deemed it substantial to issue a statement of interest in that case, which sets forth to the courts and the industry that appraisers can be held liable under the Fair Housing Act, and establishes that the US's commitment to combating discrimination in appraisals. The other significant win that we determined in the course of this plan was that a comment letter that went to the Appraisal Foundation. And you heard Nikitra in her comments talk about USPAP and ethics. And so as a result of these several agencies and the task force, a comment letter was issued to the Appraisal Foundation, clarifying that the Fair Housing Act and ECOA, Equal Credit Opportunity Act, covers all aspects of appraisal, and that includes residential and commercial. And then a couple other wins here. The Appraisal Subcommittee released the independent report that you heard very clearly from Nikitra in her comments. And we found that to be significant. It was a very serendipitous process almost. Fannie and Freddie released their reports. NAFA released its report, which worked very well and cohesive with some of the recommendations and action items that found themselves in the report, and was very validating, not just to the task force, but to the industry at large, that agencies were coming together to tackle this issue in a more substantial way. And then lastly, from a HUD perspective, our FHA issued mortgagee letter, we carry a large book of our business comes from our FHA mortgages. And we ensured to clarify non-discrimination requirements were applicable to appraisers and lenders, including the Fair Housing Act and anti-discrimination laws. You can go to the next slide, please. And I mentioned some of the key themes from the action plan. Again, we know that making the appraisal industry more accountable, we know that they've operated in a relatively closed and self-regulated framework. Collectively, the task force landed on substantial and substantive action items that will increase the accountability. And just for example, one of the action items is to strengthen and coordinate among supervisory enforcement agencies to expand regulatory agency examination procedures. So working in tandem with the Department of Justice, the Office of Comptroller, Federal Reserve Board, these agencies will collaborate to increase examination procedures. Next slide. And empowering consumers with information and assistance. Big ticket item here, right? Again, as you've heard from the three of us collectively, we know that consumers are not aware of the process. It's very transactional, and it's an emotional transaction, right? Either in the origination of a loan or the refinance of the loan. An individual or family is seeking to gain wealth, create wealth, leverage wealth to carry out some transaction, either the repair of a home, using funds to support a college education, what have you. It's very transactional. And in that moment, consumers don't have resources or may not know what to do or where to go. And the whole notion of filing a complaint in that moment will not secure the loan. It won't secure the refinance transaction. And so we want to make sure that consumers are educated before they engage in those transactions. And so you'll see born in the action plan that we are working very closely with housing counseling agencies to educate consumers in that process. So in the pre-purchase of a home, we've also made some commitments to fund and to work in tandem with our FIP agencies on testing and also in education and outreach to work in tandem with industry. Next slide. So ensuring that technology-based alternatives are important. Bad data in, bad data out. I know as fair housing practitioners, you've heard, we've had these discussions. In fact, with the National Fair Housing Training Academy, we held a session on algorithmic bias. So we know that these automated valuation models can bake in discrimination. And so as a part of the efforts of the task force, we wanted to make sure that we included standards and processes to ensure that bias is not perpetuated in that process. And cultivating an appraisal profession that's well-trained and looks like the communities that it serves, right? So won't regurgitate the statistics here. You heard at the top of the hour that there's a lack of diversity, and we do know that, right? It's not a secret. And we know that in order to create change, we're going to ensure that individuals and communities have access to this opportunity. And so as we speak, although the action plan lays out a framework for it, there are conversations with the Appraisal Foundation, with the Appraisal Subcommittee. In fact, the Appraisal Subcommittee right now to address issues in rural America has piloted a program in Mississippi and in South Dakota. There is proposed legislation on the Hill that gives opportunity for historically Black colleges and universities and minority serving institutions to be able to create apprenticeship programs and training opportunities there. And so we believe that this particular theme and action item in the report will serve to create diversity in the industry. Okay, go to the next. Yes, thank you. So the coordination of enforcement to keep industry accountable. Obviously, I've been working in fair housing for 20 years now, and so enforcement is something critical. And as I was going through this process, something that I shared with many of my colleagues is that although they believe this to be Herculean to address and to kind of crack the nut as it relates to appraisal bias. Those same thoughts were had when we were looking at insurance discrimination. And we were able to change that industry and create transformation in that industry through the enforcement efforts, through testing, through education and outreach, through the conciliations and settlement agreements. So it's critically important as practitioners, as you're accessing cases, you're coaching people, that you look to the future state of what we want to do, what we need to do as it relates to changing this industry. And those things can be born in your conciliation agreement. So I firmly believe that you have to think creatively, think innovatively, and think implementation when coordinating enforcement efforts. And so again, as a part of the action plan, we create a framework for doing that. Leveraging federal data and expertise to inform policy, practice, and research on appraisal bias. Again, really big ticket item here. So what we know is that, again, this report was a sprint. We like to consider it a milestone, not a capstone. And we know that there's additional work to do. We've heard from industry, advocacy, and researchers that the data needs to be more transparent and publicly available. And right now, federal government is fragmented in how data is captured. The look ahead is that we create a repository that's akin to Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data, and the maintenance and the aggregation of that data could find itself in a repository for appraisal data as well. And so you'll see in the action plan that we've documented opportunities to do so. But also, this is not a one report wonder. We are continuing to do this work. And so our data research work stream and committees are currently already creating opportunities where, we continue this work. We're working with philanthropy and others to think through how we can create a repository for data. And I'll just add, just a shameless plug here. During this process, we also concurrently launched our PAVE website at pave.hud.gov. You will be able to find the report there. You'll also find a host of information where you're able to locate your state and find out what state information exists. You'll also be able to find out about the complaint process. So right now, obviously complaints can be filed with HUD at HUD.gov, but complaints can also be filed with CFPB and with the appraisal subcommittee. There lies some of the problem, right? People don't know who and where to file. And so when you're thinking about the Fair Housing Act, it should obviously come to HUD or come to one of your state and local agencies. When you think about it from a consumer perspective, it could be filed with CFPB under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. But complaints can be filed with the appraisal subcommittee if you believe that an appraiser has rendered an inaccurate appraisal. So not where you believe that discrimination has occurred, but an inaccurate appraisal can be filed with the appraisal subcommittee, and they have regulatory and oversight of states. So I will stop there because I know we're past our time, and hopefully we'll still have an opportunity to take questions.
All right, thank you so much, Melody. Yes, we are at 2 o'clock, 2:05 actually. The time flies by when we're talking about such wonderful work and scholarship on such a great, such an important issue. If our panelists have another minute yet, I'd love to ask them to respond to a question. This is a huge and complex issue, as we've talked about over the past hour. If there's one, I'd love for you to point out perhaps one key action or one key piece of messaging that we could take away from this discussion today to take out into our communities as fair housing practitioners, as human relations staff, as community partners. So I'd love to ask you all to respond to that.
Thanks, Brittany. I'll kick us off if that's all right. One of the things that we continue to remind everyone is that we're not talking about, a few bad apples. We're talking about systemic challenges. And oftentimes when we're talking about appraisal bias, people think about discrimination and they don't understand that intent doesn't have to be at the foundation of that discrimination. And because of our history of redlining, so much of the challenges that we see ongoing in appraisals is historic devaluation of property in communities of color. So it's systemically manifesting itself. So we have to change it from the system. So one thing that we've been pushing for at the National Fair Housing Alliance is to create this kind of new agency that would focus on valuation to make clarity around responsibilities really clear, operating in the way that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau operates today. So we think that that type of systemic reform is needed in the industry overall. So thank you.
And I'll follow up everything that Nikitra just said because she stated it perfectly. And I would just add that as we're doing everything that she mentioned, we keep people at the core of that conversation, because every time we talk about data, we're actually talking about heartbeats. Remember that there are folks who are being harmed throughout this process and can be made whole, and being made whole is more than monetary awards rather, but it's also other things that people will need in order to move forward.
And I'll see if I can't close this out here. Comment. There's much to be done. Again, Nikitra said it, this is a systemic issue, and it didn't just start because it's a buzzword today. Appraisal bias has been baked into all forms and fashions of our existence since the 1930s. It has a history. It will not end in a sprint. This is a marathon, and the drumbeat that we all will need to play is to think about the will that we need to will industry to hunker down and think about how they can create change and equitable strategies in the way that they lend and that they do business. It will take commitment. It's going to take commitment from fair housing practitioners as yourselves and myself and others to stay the course, to create these rich opportunities for dialogue, because we can't do it alone. And it's going to require that we have continued partnership with industry, with academics, with researchers. I sat in a room with philanthropic organizations yesterday, billions of dollars in opportunities to train and to commit to communities is what I heard. And so those partnerships and collaborations are critical. And then lastly, skill building. We have to be students of fair housing. Creating good case law is how we crack the nut in the insurance investigations. And I think that we have to skill build as practitioners, understand the law, think innovatively and creatively about how we move forward cases and conciliations, and keep those lines of communication open so that we're working in tandem with each other. And that's how we'll bring about transformative change. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for your leadership on this issue, for taking the time at a very busy time of year for fair housing practitioners to share with us today. I do want to point out that in the chat, there are links to the NAFA report, to the PAVE Task Force website. So please check out those resources, check out the literature that Angela provided as well to learn more about this. And at this point, I'm going to turn the show back over to Executive Director Lassiter to close us out.
Yes, and once again, we want to thank all three of these wonderful change agents for the high-level, data-rich information that they provided to us that should spark everyone who's in this space to a call of action as it relates to everything that we heard. I want to also take this time to announce the winners for Fair Housing Month for the three of you, we embarked upon an essay contest here at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission for individuals who are interested in, writing essays pertaining to a lot of things, dealing with a lot of the things that you all mentioned. So I'm happy to announce that we have three recipients of the first ever PHRC Fair Housing essay. The first place winner, all of us are winners, right? Because we all show up each day trying to fight against systemic and structural racism in our calling, as well as with our mission at the PHRC. But happy to announce that Chris Young is the first place winner, and his essay theme was on the importance to seize available opportunities to redevelop vacant properties and reimagine our spaces in light of the pandemic's changes. The second place winner was Shalonda Cook. Her essay looked at investing in community-based neighborhoods to combat housing discrimination. And the third place winner was Todd Schwartz, and his theme was looking at shifting away from auto-centric developments to encourage high-density, diverse, person-centered neighborhoods. We're excited for all three of you. And just a shameless plug, the executive director has taken the money out of my personal account to pay for this for all of you. So it's a nice little amount that you're getting. I'm just asking that you cash the checks soon as you get them. But all joking aside, for a light moment, really, really excited about the things that we're doing in the Fair Housing Commercial Property division, and want to just publicly say that 4 years ago, both Melanie and Angela served as mentors for me in this space with regards to fair housing. And I'm just glad that there are so many things that we're doing in the blueprint that you all have provided. We still have a lot of gains to make in the fair housing space. But one of the things that I'm really excited about is the mere fact that we're doing a lot of things that traditionally we hadn't been doing. So once again, want to thank all three of you. Want to thank Laura, our Director of Communications. Want to thank Brittany, and be remiss if we didn't acknowledge our leader in the Fair Housing Commercial Property space, Director Adrian Garcia. Once again, thank you. And let's get back to doing what the things that we need to do to address all of the things that we heard today and all of the things that we know are real based on the data and people's primary and secondary experiences. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you all. This was a wonderful discussion. Really informative.